Mercia, Autumn 920. Last time, it had been Aethelstan who had met her and the Alba warriors on Ethelflaed's behalf as they rode into the Seaster. Now he was the lord, and he was, Osrith was told, at prayer. It had been a long ride, but swift, the weather had been good, and she and Coltigar had seen no trouble. But now her heart soared, because if Aethelstan was at prayer, it was likely that the priest with whom he might be praying was Father Oswald, Osrith's nephew and Utad's first son. She was met instead by Miral, who looked greyer around the ears but not much changed since the last time she was there. "We heard you had married," he told her, as she and Coltigar rode their horses in through the gates of the fortified city. "I did," Osrith replied. "I married a good man who was kind to me. But then he was lost." "I am sorry," Miral told her, and he looked it. Then, he looked across to Coltigar. "Another waif and stray? You do like to collect them," he added, grinning. "He was in service to my lord husband," Osrith told him. And Osrith told him about the invasion at Bibbenberg, and that she had remarried and kept the land. "You, a farmer?" "I am learning," she told Miral. "Coltigar's father manages the land if I am not there. Their family has been farming Berwick longer even than the Angles arrived." "As long as that?" Miral asked her. He held out his hand to the Pictish boy. "Welcome to Mercia," he said in Cymric, and then in English. "I am sure you will find it so rotten here at present that you will be dying to get back to your sheep and cows." "I can fight," Coltigar told him, in broken English. "For my lady I have fought many times." "We have us." He said the word as if he might have said, "We have rats." "I am sorry to hear it," Miral said again, and showed Osrith to the stables. "Your men are here, of course," he told her, and within a few minutes, Elfkin was leading out his 4 other comrades. They beamed when they saw Osrith. With them, was Eswi. "Who is this?" Elfkin asked, eyeing the farm-dressed Coltigar. "One of my landsmen," Osrith replied. "We are training some as a militia. I chose Coltigar to come with me to learn." "He is keen," she added, hopefully. "Coltigar," she said in Pictish, "these are my men. I have known and commanded them for many years. You will be with them, and they will train you." Shay urged the young boy on, and Elfkin held out a friendly, welcoming arm. "Did you know that your lady has killed Norsemen?" he asked, in Welsh. It was good enough to get the gist across, and Coltigar gave the leader of Osrith's division a wary smile. "Elfkin here has married a Cymric girl, Oshir, always willing to gossip," told Osrith, "betraying us all by fraternizing with the ancient enemy." Elfkin grinned. "He is learning, even through I never thought he would manage." "You don't need language to understand what happens between a man and a woman," Egelfrith commented, with a big grin. "You need to when she's nagging you," Falkball put in. "I would say that's an excellent reason for ignorance," Egelfrith replied, and they laughed. Coltigar would do fine, Osrith knew, and it wasn't long before he was in the courtyard being shown the basics by Elfkin, a sword in his hand. Osrith watched the young man swipe it through the air and overbalance a little, so used that he was to wielding an axe, and her heart filled with happiness when she saw the once little boy who had been scared of the dark, now captain of her mercenary company, show Coltigar what he knew, what he had learned from Osrith. Then, Miral placed a hand on her shoulder. He looked around the courtyard and then turned to Osrith, and said, in a voice that carried, "So you are here to continue with the remainder of your service, Osrith of Mercia?" Several people looked at Miral and then at Osrith. Very good, she thought, and joined in. "I will see my lord Aethelstan, or his general Aldhelm." "Come with me," Miral continued, and they headed to the hall, which stood in the center of Seaster, and to the armory to the side. There, he locked the door behind her and grinned at Osrith. "Just as," Osrith replied. "Safe, where no one could hear." "And the someone who got here before you," Miral added. It was then that Osrith noticed a figure who would have been behind the armory door if it were opened. It was Eswi, and he stepped towards Osth, and took her hands in his for a few moments. "The children are safe?" Osrith asked, for he had been in charge of taking them back to Alba. "Indeed," he told her. "And you are here, which is where Constantine wants you. Constantine? Miral asked. The king of Alba, Eswi quipped. How many other Constantines do you know? We are here for information, he added, and nodded to Osrith. Amongst other things, the impending battle. Osrith nodded. As they had neared Seaster, she had seen a camp of soldiers to the south, in Ethelflaed's heartland. Golden dragons fluttered on a red field. It was a possibility, but she hoped in some ways it would not come to that. If they were to fight, Uhtred would likely be on the West Saxon side. He had sworn to Edward before he had sworn to Aethelstan. But then, this was her brother she was thinking about, and Uhtred did many things that defied logic. There is unrest, Miral told them, stalking to a chair that was used by the Metas when they hammered the plate metal into armor, and he gestured towards two others. Edward of Wessex is ill. Ill? What is wrong? Osrith interrupted. No one knows. But if he dies, there will be a fight for the throne. Miral went on. Ethelred has already been declared legitimate in Wessex, whereas Ethelhelm would like him to be proclaimed in Mercia, to be safer when the time comes. Osrith sighed. There was unrest, too much. Dyfnwil first, and now Edward. The West Saxon troops are coming, and who knows who they will support? Miral jadded. Isn't it obvious? Eswi asked. No, Miral replied, reaching for a bottle of spirit. Birch brandy by the smell that came to Osrith's nose and swigging deeply before passing the bottle to Eswi. They will want to fight for unity, yet if they do that they are openly supporting Aethelstan, who has been declared a bastard. If they fight for the independence factions, then they are fighting against Edward's unity policy. What is the official line? Osrith asked. Miral gave her a half smile, half grimace. They are here to fight against the Danes and the Norse, who still flood the land. But that is not all. There has been an increase in forces at Tamworth, Ethelflaed's capital, where Aethelstan lived now. Aethelstan is not at Tamworth, is he? He is here, in Seaster? Osrith asked. He is. And he is taking counsel from his lords. Osrith swallowed. It came to that, did it? So it depends on what my brother does, Osrith mused aloud. Is he here? With all his men, armed, ready for battle, Miral told her. Which is why I can't help but think that a battle is coming. He'll fight for Aethelstan, of course, Osrith told him, thinking of Uhtred's warriors, Sihrik and her husband, of course, little Rorik, who was not so little anymore, and the young man he had spared on the beach of St. David's. But if Wessex is weak, there may be more disunity in the alliance than before. And then she gave Miral a look of alarm. And what of Elfwin? Where is she? For that young woman had been troubling Osrith ever since her mother, Ethelflaed's, last words to Osrith had been a demand for her to protect her daughter. Osrith had never accepted, yet she felt troubled by it. Gone, no one knows where, Miral told her. Last seen being taken from Tamworth by her uncle's men. Perhaps I can help there, Eswi put in. I have heard she is in a monastery at Salisbury, though I have not been able to obtain corroborating evidence. Perhaps your husband can help there, Eswi told her, but the expression on her face told him he had overstepped the mark. I have told Constantine that I will not use Finan for intelligence. Was that why he was here? Was Constantine pressing to overturn the agreement he had made with her? It was like him. Osrith knew. Husband? Miral repeated. Forgive me, I thought you said he had died. At Bibbenberg. Osrith smiled. And then the father of my child went to the king and asked that he marry me. I agreed. She waited for Miral to work it out. The father of your child? Miral repeated, and then his face darkened. You don't mean ... the man who fought his own brother at Eofic, when Elfrith was killed. He ... wasn't he the man who attacked you when you were young? He attacked me when I am almost the same age as I am now, Osrith mused. When we were in bed together just 4 nights ago, but not in the same way you mean, old friend. But Miral was shaking his head. This man was the same man who attacked you when you were young, he repeated, and looked to Eswi. Tell me, that he has never raised a hand to you. If he has, she will have raised it back, Eswi replied, and Osrith thought of her husband. How he had been WTH her when she had taken the herbs that made her miscarry Edward's child, how he had stood up to Uhtred when he was looking for her, how he held her as if she was the most important thing in the world. He never has, Miral, Osrith assured him, then added if only to get off the subject. I need to know several things about what's happening here. Do you indeed? Miral grinned. So who do you want to speak to first in order to find these out? Aethelstan, or Aldhelm? He looked at the door on the opposite side of the armory which led to the hall, where both men would probably now be. Or myself? Why you? Osrith asked. Because, Miral told her slowly, the Elfrith is dead. I am the leader of the independence movement, of course. As always, 888,888,888. In the end it was Father Oswald that Osrith spoke to first. He was coming from the chapel, and it was only when she put her hand on his arm that he turned. A smile came to his face, and Osrith smiled back. Come, he said to her, to my quarters. And he opened up a side door that took them up a flight of stairs and into a room above the chapel. It was well appointed, with the sunlight in the south shining through the window, and he directed Osrith to a chair. He looked older, and he must now have been in his late 30s. He was clearly trusted well enough by Aethelstan to oversee his prayers, though they had known one another as boys. Since Aethelstan had grown up in Ethelflaed's household and Sciora and Utad, as he was called then, had lived with her too, when they had not been at monasteries learning about God. You look well, aunt, her nephew told her, and Osrith tried not to roll her eyes. Well, Osrith repeated, and it had been her being well which meant that her armor no longer fitted properly and she had had to have Rhea help her with her bindings. Good eating on the farm and not enough sword practice. I heard you married, he continued, offering her some wine. Osrith nodded, and allowed him to pour her a small cupful. Yes, she agreed. And have lands, he added. News travels fast. Your father has Bibbenberg, yours by right, she told her nephew. I know. I will not claim it, my younger brother will, I think. And Osrith thought about the younger brother, kept by Hild safely in a monastery until he was old enough to be brought to his father. The boy was now living at Bibbenberg, probably in his late teens, probably called Tigar's age. So tell me, Osrith asked of her nephew, what has happened in Mercia since I was last here? When were you last here? Father Oswald asked. And Osrith had to think. It must have been when she was expecting young Finan, she considered. She had stayed in Alba after he was born. To Tenholg, she told him, but Father Oswald shook his head. You came, do you not remember, to Seaster? He shook his head again. You fought the Norse, and then tracked them to Eoferwick. And Osrith had to admit it had gone from her mind, and that she was having a difficult time even remembering the events when Ragnall and Brida had torn north to Eoferwick to claim it. When she had gelded Father Oswald, when Finan had fought Nine Fingers. Too many things had passed since then, not least her support of Alba against Mercia and Wessex, at Corbridge, and Sained. After the death of my aunt, the lords of Mercia swore that they would uphold the claim of the person who Ethelflaed wanted as successor, her daughter. Elfwin, Osrith said, speaking the girl's name. Through both her parents she could have claimed Mercia, but there was a faction that supported Aethelstan, not least because of his connection to Wessex. He leaned towards Osrith. I do not want to suspect, but I do suspect, that Aethelstan was complicit in Elfwin's removal, but she is safe. I am assured she is safe. In a monastery in Salisbury, Osrith replied, and the shock on her nephew's face came suddenly. How did you? I know many things. At least she is safe and not food for the crows. And here Osrith broke off. It was the last thing that Ethelflaed had asked, had begged, of Osrith to do, which was to keep her daughter safe. The only honest confession of her feeling that she remembered the spoiled woman to ever have confided to Osrith in the years of misdirection and downright lies. She had never sworn it, but Osrith felt a pang of guilt. Elfwin had inherited her mother's role, but had held it for less than a month. So, why are you here? Father Oswald asked. I owed Mercia 2 years, she told him, and I have paid 4 months back so far. So Aethelstan has my sword, and Constantine has your 2 eyes and 2 ears, Father Oswald replied, wryly. I will help you all you can. But, aunt, promise me." He trailed off, and gave her a grave look. "Promise me Constantine is not behind this?" "Behind what?" Osrith replied, shocked. "What do you think he is behind?" "The influx of Norse," he told her. "Norse coming from Irian still, overwhelming the country, polarizing feeling in Mercia. If feelings are polarized, it is because of deep-seated divisions between the lords of Mercia," she told him. "If the Norse are coming, it might be to do with the fact that the kings of Irian were defeated in battle and slain. It might be because there is unrest in the island and Norse communities are being displaced, and that Mercia is not defending her borders because of internal disputes." Osrith shook her head. Why Constantine must have the blame, she thought, made her annoyed when there were so many other reasons. What interest did Constantine have in Mercia? Although he could be doing this for spite, because of Edward's declaration in Strathclyde, Osrith would not put him past mischief, but could still perceive no benefit in terms of land, only indirectly through the Norse. She knew too little, understood too little, which was a good thing. Being an ignorant farmer was appealing to her more and more. "Give a prayer to Arion," she asked her nephew. "Good kings have died there." And her mind focused on Domhnall, who, out of everyone, was her dearest friend, who had to go back to hold together the Uyneel family and establish rule for the people of Arion over whom he had never been king. "Why are you here, aunt?" her nephew asked again. "To spy," she told him. "To garner intelligence. But, I swear, if I am being used in some sort of strategy, it is unknown to me. Mercia is dear to me," she added, "as you know." "And yet you returned to Alba," he reminded her. "To my family, and to people who have treated me as family all my life," she replied. "I am the happiest I have ever been these last weeks, working at the farm I have been given, Berwick, my late husband's land, married to the man I love." And she could not help it. Osrith knew. She was smiling, happier than she had ever been for some time. "So you are serving Mercia as you say, and intelligence gathering?" Father Oswald asked her, asking her in a way that suggested he had used that manner of questioning on a regular basis in order to prompt confessors to examine their own consciences and perhaps consider again how they have represented the truth. But Osrith could only smile. "It is as I say, I could well return from Mercia with no intelligence, or badly collected intelligence," Osrith told him. Yet, Eswe was with her, and he would know the difference. "If Mercia is in your heart, go to it," Father Oswald told her, and Osrith leaned over to him, taking his own hands in his, before he could put one of his own on her head. She needed no godly blessing, she did need what few family she had, and was so pleased, proud and pleased, to be in her nephew's company again. "I swear it," she told the former Utad, son of Utad, "if there is a plot, I know nothing of it." Father Oswald smiled, and Osrith smiled back. "And I would see you at Bibbenberg," she told him. "It is your father's now, and was your father's father's." The priest laughed. "One day, perhaps," he told her, and got to his feet. Osrith looked to the door. "And what are you intent on doing now, aunt?" "I am intent on serving Mercia," she told him. And for that, he needed to overhear what was going on in the hall, particularly Ethelstan's business. Buet sheathed, the clasp over the hilt, Osrith climbed not down, to the courtyard in the front of the chapel, but up. Time to be a bird in the rafters again, and glean what she could for her king, preferably before a battle began. 88,888,888. "Lord Utad, please can you explain what was so important that I had to be disturbed from prayer?" Ethelstan, sitting in his chair, throne, really, Osrith thought, as she looked down from the roof, was giving her brother no possibility to get out of whatever it was he wanted from the Lord of Mercia. And he had changed, Osrith thought. It had been over 2 years since Ethelfled had died, 2 years for Alfred's grandson to rule in Mercia, to oversee its lands. He looked magnificent. A glimmer of metal sat in his golden hair, and it had lengthened, falling in loose curls about his face. A reminder to Osrith of Edward, who had his curls into late childhood. But Ethelstan's must have been curled deliberately, for bronze wire was woven into some of them, a glint of emerald, or possibly garnet in them. At his throat, A garnet-encrusted pin held a green and gold cloak, the colors of Mercia, and Osrith was willing to bet that if he got up the white dragon of Mercia would be seen. Like his father, Aethelstan clearly had a taste for the expensive. And why not? Alfred was pious, but he knew that a display of wealth held the population in awe, held enemies in awe. He represented God, and the jewels and precious metals on earth needed to represent the glory of heaven beyond, unchanging, everlasting. "We have come at your request," Utad told Aethelstan. "I was under the impression this was your seal, your words." He held out what looked like a letter, rolled and the remnants of a seal at the bottom. "It is," Aethelstan told him, without looking at it. "And I was in prayer. I did not need summoning like a child, for as you know, I am no longer one." Osrith could not argue with that. If Utad had taught him anything, it was to be a king in the model of his grandfather. He could not then complain when Aethelstan used that manner to his former teacher. "And so, you have come to defend Mercia." "My Mercia." "Once the Lady Ethelflaed's Mercia," Utad reminded him. "Once the Lord Ethliad's, and the Lord Burgund's in alliance with my grandfather," and so on and so on. Osrith bit the back of her hand to prevent her from childishly giggling at Ethelstan's attitude to her brother. "If the point is that you are now needed at Mercia's behest, how is it that a week ago you knew of the West Saxon threat, before they had set up camp at Northwick?" "I did not know," Utad repeated. "I came because you summoned me." "Indeed," Aethelstan replied. "So a deal of patience could have been used, Lord Utad, rather than disturb me in prayer. Perhaps you would like to join me at the chapel sometime? It settles and focuses the mind when one unburdens to the Lord." There was a silence, and Osrith noticed Finan's hand move almost imperceptibly to Utad's shoulder. What would her brother be without the continued loyalty of Finan, bonded at the slaver's oar? Utad said nothing as Aethelstan continued to look at him. "We last saw one another at Bibbenberg. Tell me, how does your land suit you? Is it what you hoped?" "It is everything I hoped, Lord Aethelstan," Utad replied. "And, being lord of that land, I hope you come to repeat the oath that you made to my dear aunt." That was it, Osrith thought, holding into one of the beams as she listened. It wasn't a battle that had instigated Ethelstan's call of her brother, but a swearing of loyalty. He wanted what Alfred wanted, Bibbenberg, its lands, her lands, Strathclyde, Alba, the whole of the island of Britain. "You were asked to kneel for my father," Aethelstan told him. "But I do not command you to kneel. What I wish is that you reaffirm your loyalty to Mercia, through me as its lord." Was there a pause? Osrith was never sure that she noticed one or not in her brother. Whether a pause or no, she watched her brother take out his sword and lay it at Ethelstan's feet. Then he knelt. "I, Utad of Bibbenberg, its fortress and lands, do hereby swear allegiance to the Lord of Mercia, his lands and birth." Utad's voice was clear and loud. None could doubt it. And yet there was room for doubt. His prior oath was to Edward, Wessex's king. It could only mean one thing: that, once Edward died, from whatever illness he was suffering, Utad was supporting Aethelstan in his claim for Wessex. Which meant, the West Saxon men outside his walls were here at his request. Aethelstan wanted to crush the independence factions which had had Elfwin as their figurehead, and he had, now, what he needed, the support of the greatest warrior in the land. It also meant another thing: there were two Mercias, Ethelstan's and those wishing independence from Wessex, and Osrith, though neutrally collecting intelligence for Constantine, was, in effect, on the other side. For Aethelstan wanted Britain, so Constantine would do anything he could to slow Ethelstan's advance north. She was Miral's side, with Eswi, Constantine's loyal spy, and she had to wonder whether Constantine had set her up to fight in Mercia on his behalf after all. It also meant that she was on the side opposite to Finan, who was, technically, Constantine's man now he was the Lord of Berwick. Let there not be a battle, Osrith thought, watching Utad get to his feet. "Please, let there not be a battle." "Who is your priest, now Bishop Leofstan is dead?" Utad asked Aethelstan. He would know, Osrith thought, and wanted to assert this against the Lord of Mercia. "Your son," Aethelstan told him. "Bishop Oswald. Bishop, Utad told him. Osrith, too, was amazed, more so that her nephew had not said, "Indeed, how your son has risen," he added, and the Christian reference was not lost on Utad, telling from his face. Osrith thought. She also thought it was pretty cruel of Aethelstan to remind the lord who had just sworn an oath to him that he had lost his daughter. Ciora had not survived the siege of the Ophir, and Osrith had wondered, at Corbridge, whether this was the reason he had acquiesced the city to Edward so easily. Utad was dismissed, and Osrith crawled back through the roof, listening as he and Finan spoke on the steps. "I'm tellin' ye, it's going to snow," Finan told Utad. She watched her brother glance at the sky. "It's October," he told Finan. "Not even the time for blood in this blood month. We have had no frost." They were nervous, Osrith thought. She recognized it in her own warriors. They would talk about Grap, bet on whether one worm crawling in the mud was longer than another, even, while waiting on the edge of battle, on the edge of certain death. "I bet you 2 shillings. Finan offered. Utad held out a hand and they shook on it, muttering at the ease at which he was taking his money. "Bishop Leofstan is dead," Utad murmured. "And Bishop Oswald is very much alive," Finan goaded. "Do you remember Mus?" Utad grinned to his friend. "I surely do not," replied Finan. "I know you do," her brother replied. Or did. Osrith also knew Mus. Sungjafu was her Saxon name and Goma her Christian name. Bishop Leofstan had married her trying to prove he was able to convert fallen women, but Mus was the one proving that power over men came from between her thighs, that her body delighted them. She had kissed Osrith once, and it had been good, she had to admit, but not good enough to lose her head as a man might, abandon infant home and lord for the pleasures of the flesh and call it love. Nevertheless, a flame of jealousy licked inside Osrith's stomach, and she was taken aback that she cared where normally she would not. Finan was a soldier and women came naturally to him. Osrith didn't ask, and he did not tell, and it was the same the other way round. Not that there was anything to tell that he didn't already know, and as she had overheard Finan saying to her brother once, that they had a mutual agreement that he would not kill Constantine as long as Osrith did not kill Utad. But she cared now, and did not want her husband to be reminded of that perfect-bodied woman. "And did you?" Utad was still talking about Mus. "No," Finan replied. "You?" "No," Utad said. "Edith," he added. "Anyway, I am asking on behalf of a friend," and they moved from the entrance of the hall, and Osrith could no longer hear them. "You really want to bet 2 shillings?" Utad asked Finan. As they reached the stables, there were rooms for warriors there, more spacious than many halls. It was as if the Lady Ethelfled had expected a large garrison to be at Seaster and had made accommodations for them. "Bet you 2 shillings the King of Alba is behind this somewhere," Utad told him. "He gifted us land," Finan told him. "Beric." "Good." Utad smiled. He had not asked for many details from Finan when he finally returned to Bibbenberg. "At least I know you as I send my armies through to ravage land north of my own." A horn sounded in the distance. A few flakes of snow began to fall. Finan grinned at his lord, before hurrying from his side to gather Utad's men. A leaden feeling was forming in Osrith's stomach when she, too, heard the horn. Whether she wanted it or not, it would seem that there was going to be a battle, and she climbed out of the roofing thatch and onto the palisade wall. The West Saxons had surrounded Seaster. 88,888,888. Osrith found her company in the armory, preparing themselves with arms. Kaltigar looked up when Osrith entered. Fear was in his eyes, along with a measure of determination. If she had known there was going to be a war, a battle, Osrith would never have brought him. His only foes had been ones growing from the ground and covering many acres, or wide and strong with many branches. "You do not have to fight," she told him, moving to his hand and lowering his sword. "Whatever would I tell your father?" But the boy pushed her hand away, much to the astonishment of her men, and strode to Elfkin's side. "The captain, Elfkin, has shown me what to do," he insisted. And Osrith smiled for a moment, less so when she noticed the 3 dead mice in the corner of the armory. Beliefs died slowly amongst the northern folk, and it would seem, though her people attended priests and churches, Caldegard had just sacrificed for the good fortune of battle. He was far from a sacred grove, and these were not children. Urien of the Henoled would be amazed at the young man's resourcefulness. She watched him stand beside Eglfrith, and Osrith beckoned to her captain. "Whose side are we on?" "Ethelstan's, of course," Elfkin replied. "By what orders have you been given?" Osrith pushed. "From Aldhelm." Elfkin blinked, and put his arm around Osrith's shoulders. "For Ethelstan, against the West Saxons," he confided. "They fight on behalf of the Lady Elfwin, or so they say." So that was it. Ethelm, Edward's former father-in-law, was using West Saxon troops to harry Ethelstan, on behalf of his grandson, Ethel. For Mercia would never accept Ethel when they had Ethelstan, Ethelflaed's nephew, who was their lord. So force had to be used. And Aldhelm was on the side of independence. "Company," Osrith called, and they lined up before her. "Out there is a fight for Mercia. It is your land, our land." She glanced behind her. Already, the rattle of swords on shields was echoing along battle lines. And within, a heartier rattle. Mercia was bent on fighting back against Edward's West Saxons.